Alright, in this video I hope to use two-dimensional arrays to make a grid. I want to make some sort of a grid designer. And the idea of a two-dimensional array is an array of arrays, right? We have an outer array, and inside of that array we've got other arrays inside of it. It's two-dimensional. We use this double index operator, right? The first index operator will access one of the interior arrays, and then the next index operator will look inside of that array at the elements. And two-dimensional arrays are commonly used for grids where we have rows and columns, right? The arrays, this is the first array is a row, the next one's another row, the next one's another row, and then the columns you get by actually looking inside of those, right? Position 0. Nice little diagram here, right? The first number here is the row, so row 0, column 0, row 0, column 1, row 0, column 2, right? Row 1, column 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, etc. Okay, so grid 0, 2, this will be the 0th row of the first row, and then position 2, 0, 1, 2 would access this. Okay, anyway, so we're going to do that, we're going to use this to make some sort of a grid thing. Let's see what happens. So I've just got a standard little template that's got the style sheet, the main.js, and let's do some title stuff here. Call this grid designer, and I'll copy, paste that to the title here. And what I'm going to need in my HTML is we'll need a div, and I'm going to give it the class container. Sure. And inside of this, now ultimately what I want to do is generate the contents of this with JavaScript. But just to start off with and make sure we have our style all set up, let's do this just with the HTML. Now, technically what I want, I'm going to make like a, I don't know, like a 10 by 10 grid maybe. So the divs inside of this, copy and paste, I need to have 100 divs. So you can see why I want to use JavaScript to generate my 100 divs. Now, with that being said, there's this wonderful Emmet thing that's built into Visual Studio Code that allows us to do shortcuts. I can actually go div times 100, and it gives me 100 divs. Woo! Awesome. Okay, so this container, right, will be my grid, and these divs are going to be the cells inside of the grid, 100 cells. Okay, I should make sure I go live here. And we should probably see nothing, because there's nothing inside of these divs. Everything's empty. We haven't styled them. All right, let's do some styles. So let's start by, actually, hold on. Instead of class here, I want that to be an ID. Okay, and that's more for when we do the JavaScript, right? So I can use get element by ID. In the style here, then, I'm going to go container space div. So I'm going to start with the cells, right? The divs that are inside of the container. And I'm going to ask them to maybe have a border. Actually, let's do a width and a height first. Width of maybe 50 pixels and a height of 50 pixels. And then do a border of 1 pixel solid black. And actually, I'm going to go 48 and 48 because I want the whole div to be 50 by 50. And the border counts as part of that calculation. So save that. Beautiful. There's my 100 divs. Okay. Now to make it so that they're a grid, there's a couple of things I could do. We could get into CSS grid. There's actually a display grid thing. But I'm also wondering if I can just go float left. Okay. That actually might be simpler. Float left. Now, it's not fitting quite the way I think it should. What happens if I resize? Yeah, it's just dynamically taking however much space it needs. So what we could do with that is just say, hey, you know what? Container, have a width of 500 pixels, right? We said I want a 10 by 10 grid, and if each div is 50, 50 times 10 is 500, and that should give me my 10 by 10 grid. Good. Okay. All right, cool. So this looks all right. The only other thing I might say is that on our grid, we don't want them all to be white. The default will be white. I'm going to add a class called gray. Background, how original, background color, gray. And what I'd like to be able to do in order to make my grid or my maze Kind of that's what I want to do, is make like almost a maze. Should have called it Maze Designer. Anyway, is in my HTML, I could say, hey, you know what, this div, let's add a class of gray to it. And that'll have that background color. Okay, cool. All right, what I'd like to do now is, now that we've got this set up, let's actually generate this stuff. Yikes, I should just use undo. Generate all of this with JavaScript instead of typing it all out. So we can go right back to here, it's empty. Okay, let's go to our JavaScript. Grid/grid -maze designer. Okay, step number 1, what do I want to do? Let's create an array to represent a grid. So let grid be assigned, and let's call a function create grid array, like that. And do I want a separate file? Well, we'll see. Let's just define the function here, create grid array, like so, and this will create and return a grid array. In this case, we'll do a 10 by 10, but you could, I'm not going to do it in this video, but you could pass in parameters, you know, how many rows, how many columns you want, that kind of stuff. And in this case here, I'm just going to define it. Let's go let temp be assigned an array. Actually, I don't need this variable, this temp variable. I can just return, and I'm going to have an array, and inside of this array will be other arrays. And I'm just going to go zeros here. I should be counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, right? Because I want this is my first row, and I want to have 10 cells in the row, and comma, and then let's copy and paste this. And I could put it right here on the same line, but often it looks better like this because things can line up nicely. And we've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so you'll notice I've got this extension bracket pair colorizer. So you'll notice it this outer array, right? And then there's the blue ones are the inner arrays, so two-dimensional array. And a semicolon at the end here. So this just creates this 10 by 10 grid, this array, and returns it. Okay, awesome. All right, now that we've got that array, let's create divs to model the grid array. Right, we've got this grid array, and I should explain the zeros here. The idea here, and actually maybe we should do this, is a 0 will be just a regular white cell, and a 1 will be for a gray cell. And you can do whatever system you want. You could use letters in here actually to make it more meaningful maybe, right? W and G. But maybe we'll just do this and have a few 1s in here, which will be our gray cells. Okay, so let's do that. Let's create div grid. Sure. Is that descriptive enough? Create div grid. That's what it is. It's a grid of divs. Sure. We'll put that down here. Function create div grid, like so. And maybe we can do this. I know this is a global variable, but it's still a good habit to pass in values. Eventually we could maybe even have multiple grids and pass them in. Anyway. Okay, create div grid. What do I want to do here? Oh yeah, this is where I need to create these div elements and rock and roll. Okay, so let's start by getting our, oh no, I don't need our container. We basically need to loop through this thing here. All right, we need to loop through this entire two-dimensional array and pick out these values, and for every value we're going to create a div element and add it to the container. Right, here's my container. So I'm going to add a div element to my container for every cell inside of this array. So common way to loop through this is I would go for let row. We always loop through the rows first because that's our right? These arrays, row position 0, position 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the columns are the values inside. So we'll start at 0. Row is less than 10 because we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And row plus plus. So that'll loop through these rows, and for each row I want to loop through the columns. So for let column be assigned 0, column is less than 10, column plus plus. I'm a little leery writing out this 10 here. Normally what I would do, and actually let's do it. I feel like we should have some global constants. Instead of let, you can use const and have like a num rows, const num columns, and then we can just use these variables. The const just means that these variables shouldn't change throughout our program. I think it just makes it more efficient. And it allows us to use these variables in multiple places. And if I want to update and change it, I just have to change it in one location. Okay. Anyway, so I'm going to loop through these things. And what am I going to do? I want to create a div for each element in my 2D grid. Okay, so we can actually do that. Let div element be assigned document.create element, and you can pass in what type of element you want to create. So this hasn't added this element to the page yet. It's just creating this div element, which later on will add to our container. And what I want to do with this div element is I'm going to look up the value inside of my grid, right, inside of here, by going if grid row column, right? So those are my variables, row and column. So if 0, 0, so 0, 0, that first element right there, if it equals 1, then I want to go div element.classList.add gray. And if it doesn't equal 1, if it's 0, I don't want to touch it because the default color should be a white background. We're just going to add that gray class for all the ones with a 1 in it. Okay, and now that I've done that, I should be able to add div to container. So document.getElementById container. And I believe the command is append. Right, that'll add it onto the end of that element. And I'm just going to append the div element. Oh, I don't know if this is going to work. We'll find out. Did I call this function? Yes, I did. Okay, let's save that. Oh, ta-da! There it is. Okay, awesome. Okay, and now you should be able to see wherever there's a 1, that corresponds to the gray. Let's add a couple. Let's just add like a little wall of 1s on the side here and see if that updates. Hit save. Ta-da! Okay, cool. All right, last little quick thing that I might do here is I want to make a new file. I like to keep stuff organized. I'll just call it grid.js. And I would like to take these wonderful grid functions and put them inside of grid.js. Right, grid functions. Save, and then in here, we're going to add on, I'm going to make another video after this where we'll add more functionality, but this will just be working with the grid and call those functions. Now this shouldn't work now because I need to load grid.js. Okay, so what do I have here? A couple of global constants. We create that grid array, and then we create the div grid based off of that grid array, and that gives us this. In the next video, I want to look at trying to update this by clicking, right? Being able to add an event listener to each of the cells and being able to select whether I want it to be white or gray. Okay, hope that made sense so far. Two-dimensional array, rows, columns. All right, take care. See you in the next video.